You are a noblewoman in the year 1347, standing before your looking glass in the dim candlelight of your chamber. Your ladies in waiting bustle around you, lacing, tucking, and arranging layers upon layers of fabric. But here's what would shock you about this morning ritual. Beneath that elaborate gown, beneath those rich fabrics that proclaim your status to the world, you're wearing absolutely nothing that we would recognize as underwear today. No delicate lace panties, no supportive brassieres, no comfortable cotton undergarments. Just your bare skin against rough linen, held in place by techniques so ingenious and so utterly foreign to our modern sensibilities that they would leave you speechless. You think you know what medieval women wore beneath their dresses, but everything you believe is wrong. The truth about medieval undergarments isn't just fascinating. It's a window into a world where women's bodies were understood, managed, and adorned in ways that would seem impossible today. These weren't primitive people stumbling through life in discomfort. They were sophisticated individuals who developed intricate systems of support, hygiene, and fashion that worked brilliantly for their time, even if they defy everything we think we know about proper undergarments. Before diving into these forgotten secrets of medieval fashion, if you enjoyed learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient mysteries together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you think about medieval women and their relationship with their bodies, their clothes, and their daily lives. This isn't just about fabric and fashion. It's about survival, status, and the ingenious ways women navigated a world that demanded both modesty and practicality in equal measure. Let's start with the most shocking revelation. The concept of underwear as we know it simply didn't exist for medieval women. Not because they were backwards or unsophisticated, but because their entire approach to clothing and the body was fundamentally different from ours. Where we see the need for separate undergarments, they saw integrated solutions. Where we demand individual support pieces, they created holistic systems that worked with their lifestyle, not against it. To understand what medieval women actually wore, we need to strip away 500 years of assumptions about proper undergarments and dive into a world where clothing was both more complex and more practical than anything in your modern wardrobe. The medieval woman's relationship with her body and her clothes was intimate, strategic, and surprisingly empowering in ways that would astonish contemporary feminists. Picture this. It's dawn in a medieval castle, and Lady Eleanor's preparing for a day that might include everything from receiving foreign dignitaries to overseeing the harvest, from dancing at a feast to potentially fleeing on horseback if enemies approach the walls. Her clothing needs to accommodate all of these possibilities while maintaining the strict social codes that govern everything from the color of her sleeves to the length of her train. How does she achieve this miracle of medieval engineering? The answer lies in what historians call the foundation system, a method of layering and securing fabric that created support, shape, and flexibility without a single item we would recognize as underwear. The first layer against her skin wasn't panties or a bra, but something called a chemise or shift. This wasn't underwear in our sense. It was a full-length linen garment that served multiple functions simultaneously. The chemise was made from the finest linen the family could afford, and its quality said everything about their social status. For wealthy women, this garment might be made from linen so fine it was nearly transparent, decorated with embroidery that cost more than most people earned in a year. For common women, it was still linen, but coarser and more practical. The key was that this single garment replaced everything we think of as essential undergarments. But here's where it gets fascinating. The chemise wasn't just about modesty or hygiene. It was a sophisticated piece of engineering designed to solve multiple problems at once. The linen absorbed moisture and oils from the skin, protecting the expensive outer garments that couldn't be washed frequently. It provided a smooth surface under other layers, preventing chafing and creating the silhouette that medieval fashion demanded. And most importantly, it could be removed and laundered regularly, something impossible with the complex outer garments of the era. The genius of the chemise system becomes clear when you realize that medieval women were dealing with challenges we can barely imagine. Outer garments were investments that might last a lifetime, made from materials like silk, wool, and fur that were incredibly valuable and difficult to clean. Washing a noble's gown wasn't just impractical, it could destroy months of work and hundreds of pounds worth of fabric. The chemise solved this problem elegantly, creating a washable barrier between body and investment. But the chemise was just the beginning of the medieval foundation system. Over this went what we might call the real genius of medieval women's fashion, the kirtle. This wasn't underwear either, but rather what we might think of as a fitted dress that served as both foundation garment and, depending on the occasion, potentially the only outer layer needed for informal situations. The kirtle was where medieval women's clothing became truly revolutionary. This garment was fitted closely to the torso using techniques that provided support and shaping without any of the separate undergarments we consider essential. The secret lay in the construction. The kirtle was cut and sewn to follow the natural lines of the woman's body, with strategic seaming and lacing that created lift, support, and the fashionable silhouette of the era. Think about this for a moment. Medieval seamstresses, without any of our modern understanding of anatomy or engineering principles, created garments that solved the same problems as our modern bras, shapewear, and foundation garments. They did this through pure observation, experimentation, and skill passed down through generations of women who understood their bodies and their needs. The kirtle's construction was a marvel of medieval engineering. The bodice was cut to lift and support the bust, using principles that wouldn't be formally understood until centuries later. Seams were placed strategically to create shaping without binding. The waist was defined not through external corsetry, but through expert tailoring that worked with the body's natural curves. And all of this was achieved using techniques that modern fashion designers study and struggle to replicate. For support that we might expect from a modern bra, medieval women relied on the combination of the chemise and kirtle working together. The chemise provided a smooth, clean layer against the skin, while the kirtle's fitted construction lifted and shaped. The result was support that was actually superior to many modern undergarments in terms of comfort and natural movement. Medieval women could work, dance, ride horses, and engage in all their daily activities with complete freedom of movement. But what about the question that's probably burning in your mind right now? What about the bottom half? Surely medieval women wore some kind of undergarments beneath their skirts? This is where the story gets even more fascinating, because the answer reveals just how different medieval attitudes toward the body and modesty really were. Medieval women across all social classes wore nothing under their skirts that we would recognize as underwear. No panties, no drawers, no undergarments of any kind. This wasn't because they were immodest or unaware of hygiene, quite the opposite. This was a deliberate choice based on practical considerations that made perfect sense in their world. The reasons for this apparent lack of undergarments were actually quite sophisticated. First, medieval women's skirts were typically long and full, providing complete coverage and modesty without the need for additional layers underneath. The chemise, which extended well past the knees and often to the ankles, provided any necessary coverage and protection. Additional undergarments would have been redundant and potentially problematic. Second, and this might surprise you, medieval attitudes toward hygiene and bodily functions were in many ways more practical than our own. Medieval women understood that tight-fitting undergarments could trap moisture and create health problems. The loose, flowing design of their clothing allowed for air circulation and natural cooling. A sophisticated understanding of body temperature regulation that we're only now rediscovering in modern athletic wear. Third, the practical demands of medieval life made additional undergarments not just unnecessary, but potentially dangerous. Medieval women needed to be able to relieve themselves quickly and easily, often in outdoor facilities or chamber pots. The complex lacing and fastenings of their outer garments already made this challenging enough without adding additional layers to navigate. But perhaps most importantly, medieval women had developed techniques for managing their clothing that eliminated the need for undergarments while maintaining complete modesty and comfort. These techniques were passed down from mother to daughter, creating a body of knowledge about clothing management that was as sophisticated as any modern fashion system. The way medieval women moved, sat, and arranged their clothing was an art form in itself. They learned from childhood how to manage multiple layers of fabric, how to sit gracefully while wearing long trains, how to walk upstairs without tripping on their skirts, and how to maintain modesty in any situation. This wasn't just about fashion, it was about mastering a complex system that allowed them to function effectively in their world while maintaining the social codes that governed their lives. Medieval women also developed ingenious solutions for the challenges we might expect undergarments to solve. For menstruation, they used absorbent cloths that could be washed and reused, held in place by the natural tension of their fitted clothing rather than by separate garments. For additional warmth in winter, they added extra layers of clothing rather than undergarments, creating systems of insulation that were both more effective and more adjustable than anything we use today. The sophistication of medieval women's clothing systems becomes even more apparent when you consider the different needs of different social classes. A noble lady's clothing system was designed for ceremonial occasions, court life, and the complex social interactions of the aristocracy. A merchant's wife needed clothing that could transition from household management to social occasions. A peasant woman required garments that could withstand physical labor while still maintaining appropriate modesty and femininity. Each of these women developed clothing systems perfectly adapted to their needs, all without the separate undergarments we consider essential. They did this by understanding their bodies, their activities, and their social requirements in ways that allowed them to create integrated solutions rather than the compartmentalized approach we use today. The construction techniques used in medieval women's clothing were passed down through generations of seamstresses who understood not just how to sew, but how to create garments that worked with the female body rather than against it. These women were engineers as much as fashion designers, solving complex problems of support, comfort, and social presentation through pure skill and observation. As we begin to understand the true sophistication of medieval women's clothing systems, we start to see that the absence of underwear wasn't a lack of sophistication. It was a different kind of sophistication entirely. These women had solved the same problems we face today, but they had done it in ways that integrated all their solutions into fewer, more versatile garments. But this is just the beginning of the story. The techniques medieval women used for support, the ingenious ways they managed hygiene, and the social codes that governed every aspect of their dress reveal a world far more complex and sophisticated than we ever imagined. The social codes that governed medieval women's dress were as complex as any legal system, and understanding them reveals why their clothing solutions were so ingenious. Every aspect of a woman's appearance, from the color of her fabric to the length of her sleeves, communicated vital information about her marital status, social rank, family wealth, and even her moral character. In this environment, clothing wasn't just about covering the body, it was about survival in a world where misreading social signals could mean disaster. Consider the young wife of a merchant in 14th century London. Her clothing had to navigate an impossibly narrow path between displaying her husband's prosperity and avoiding accusations of pride or vanity that could destroy their business relationships. Too plain, and people would assume the business was failing. Too elaborate, and she might be accused of putting on airs above her station. Her foundation system, that carefully engineered combination of chemise and kirtle, had to create the perfect silhouette that said, prosperous but humble, fashionable but not frivolous. The genius lay in how these women used the construction of their garments to communicate these subtle messages. The chemise might be made from fine linen, but it would never be visible except perhaps at the neckline and sleeves. The kirtle's cut and fit could suggest wealth through its expert tailoring, while maintaining appropriate modesty through its coverage. Every element worked together to create a complete communication system that modern fashion can barely comprehend. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. Medieval women were creating these complex social messages while dealing with physical challenges that would defeat most modern women. Imagine trying to maintain perfect posture and graceful movement while wearing 20 pounds of fabric. including a train that might extend 3 feet behind you, sleeves that could drag on the ground, and a headdress that added another foot to your height. Now imagine doing all of this without a single undergarment for support, relying entirely on the engineering of your foundation system. The physical demands were extraordinary. Medieval women learned to move like dancers, distributing the weight of their clothing so efficiently that they could glide across a room without apparent effort. They developed core strength that would impress modern athletes because their clothing systems required constant, subtle muscular engagement to maintain proper posture and prevent their garments from shifting or bunching. The kirtle played a crucial role in this physical mastery. Its fitted construction didn't just provide bust support, it created a foundation that helped distribute the weight of heavy outer garments across the entire torso. The strategic placement of seams and the careful graduation of the fit from chest to waist to hips created a kind of architectural support system that worked with the body's natural structure rather than fighting against it. Medieval seamstresses understood principles of weight distribution and structural support that wouldn't be formally studied until the development of modern engineering. They knew instinctively how to place seams to follow stress lines, how to use fabric grain to create stability, and how to construct garments that would maintain their shape and support even under the extreme demands of medieval life. The lacing systems used in medieval clothing were particularly sophisticated. These weren't simple corset lacings, they were complex engineering solutions that allowed for adjustment throughout the day as the body's needs changed. A woman might need different levels of support for morning household duties, afternoon social calls, and evening festivities. The lacing systems in her kirtle allowed for these adjustments without requiring complete costume changes. But the true genius of medieval women's clothing systems becomes apparent when you consider seasonal variations. Modern women simply add or remove layers of underwear to adapt to changing temperatures. Medieval women had to solve this problem using their integrated foundation system, and their solutions were remarkably elegant. In winter, the chemise might be made from heavier linen or even fine wool. Additional chemises could be layered for warmth, creating an insulation system that was both more effective and more adjustable than modern thermal underwear. The kirtle's construction allowed for these variations without compromising its support function. Some winter kirtles were lined with fur or padded with down, creating garments that were simultaneously foundation wear, insulation, and fashion statement. Summer presented different challenges. The chemise became crucial for absorbing perspiration and protecting expensive outer garments from staining. Medieval women developed techniques for creating chemises that were almost transparent when dry, but became more opaque when damp, providing automatic modesty protection. The linen used was often treated with herbs and oils that provided both pleasant scents and antimicrobial properties. The regional variations in these clothing systems revealed just how sophisticated medieval women's understanding of their needs really was. Women in the cold, damp climate of northern England developed different foundation systems than women in the Mediterranean regions of southern France. Each system was perfectly adapted to local climate, available materials, and regional fashion requirements, yet all shared the same basic principles of integrated support and function. Consider the differences in how these systems handled the challenges of different occupations. The wife of a knight needed clothing that could transition from managing a household to formal court appearances to potentially fleeing danger at a moment's notice. Her foundation system had to provide support for physical activity while maintaining the appearance required for social functions. The construction techniques used in her kirtle would be different from those used for a merchant's wife who rarely engaged in physical activity, but needed to project an image of prosperous respectability. The fabrics chosen for these foundation garments reveal another layer of sophistication. Medieval women understood the properties of different fibers in ways that modern consumers, accustomed to synthetic blends, can barely comprehend. They knew which linens would soften with washing, which would maintain their structure under stress, and which would provide the best combination of comfort and durability for their specific needs. The chemise required linen with specific properties: soft enough for comfort against the skin, absorbent enough to manage moisture, strong enough to withstand frequent washing, and fine enough to create smooth lines under other garments. Medieval women could evaluate these properties by touch, selecting fabrics that would perform perfectly for their intended use. This knowledge was passed down through generations, creating a body of expertise that rivaled modern textile science. The kirtle demanded different fabric properties entirely. It needed materials that would hold their shape under stress, provide structure without stiffness, and maintain their appearance despite constant wear. Medieval women developed techniques for treating fabrics to enhance these properties, using everything from beaten egg whites to create stiffness to special weaving techniques that provided stretch and recovery. The color choices in medieval women's foundation garments were far from arbitrary. The chemise was typically white or natural linen color, not just for cleanliness, but because these colors reflected heat and showed dirt, encouraging regular washing. The kirtle might be dyed in colors that complemented the outer garments while serving practical purposes. Darker colors for daily wear that wouldn't show stains. Lighter colors for special occasions when appearance was paramount. Medieval women also understood the psychological aspects of clothing in ways that modern psychology is only beginning to appreciate. They knew that the foundation system affected not just how they looked, but how they felt and moved. A well-constructed kirtle didn't just provide physical support, it provided confidence, encouraging the upright posture and graceful movement that medieval society demanded from women of quality. The process of getting dressed in medieval times was a ritual that reinforced these psychological benefits. Unlike our hurried modern routines, medieval women took time with their foundation system, ensuring that every element was properly positioned and adjusted. This wasn't vanity, it was practical necessity. A poorly fitted foundation system could be not just uncomfortable, but actually dangerous, as it might shift during the day and create problems with the outer garments that couldn't be easily corrected. The social aspects of medieval dressing were equally important. Wealthy women typically had assistance with their foundation system, not because they were incapable of dressing themselves, but because the complexity of the garments required multiple hands for proper fitting. This created opportunities for intimate conversation and relationship building between women and their attendants, strengthening the social bonds that were crucial for survival in medieval society. But perhaps most fascinating is how medieval women adapted their foundation systems for special circumstances. Pregnancy required different solutions than our modern maternity wear provides. Instead of separate maternity garments, medieval women modified their existing foundation systems using adjustable lacing and strategic construction to accommodate their changing bodies while maintaining appropriate appearance and support. The techniques they developed for nursing mothers were particularly ingenious, creating access without compromising the structure or appearance of their clothing. These solutions were so effective that some modern historical reenactors have adopted medieval techniques in preference to contemporary nursing wear. As we delve deeper into the mechanics of how these remarkable women managed their daily lives without modern undergarments, we begin to see that every aspect of their clothing system was interconnected, creating solutions that were not just functional but elegant in their efficiency. But the most astonishing revelations are yet to come. Travel preparations revealed perhaps the most ingenious aspects of medieval women's foundation systems. When a noblewoman embarked on a journey that might last weeks or months, she couldn't simply pack a suitcase full of clean underwear. Instead, she had to plan a clothing strategy that would maintain her appearance, comfort, and social status while dealing with the harsh realities of medieval travel: muddy roads, primitive accommodations, and limited washing facilities. The solution lay in what we might call the modular system of medieval dress. A traveling woman would pack multiple chemises, not because she needed variety, but because these were the only garments that could be practically washed and dried during travel. While her outer garments remained constant, she could maintain hygiene and freshness by changing her foundation layer regularly. This system was so effective that some modern travelers have adopted similar strategies for extended journeys, but the real genius emerged in how medieval women handled the unexpected. Picture Lady Margaret, traveling from her castle in Yorkshire to the court in London, when her party is caught in a sudden storm. Her outer garments are soaked through, but her foundation system continues to function perfectly. The chemise made from high-quality linen actually becomes more comfortable when damp, providing cooling and preventing chafing. The kirtle's construction allows it to maintain its shape and support even when wet, ensuring that when she reaches shelter and can change her outer garments, she still looks dignified and composed. Medieval women also developed remarkable techniques for what we might call quick changes, adapting their appearance for different social situations without access to modern conveniences. A merchant's wife attending a guild feast might need to transform from household manager to social butterfly in minutes. Her foundation system made this possible through clever construction details that could be adjusted to create different silhouettes and levels of formality. The kirtle might feature removable sleeves that could be switched for different occasions, or adjustable necklines that could be modest for daily wear and more fashionable for evening events. These weren't just practical considerations, they were economic necessities. Most medieval women owned far fewer garments than we might imagine, and each piece had to serve multiple functions to justify its cost and storage space. The seasonal transitions that medieval women navigated reveal another layer of sophistication in their clothing systems. As autumn approached, they didn't simply add sweaters and switch to warmer underwear. Instead, they gradually modified their foundation systems, layering additional chemises and adjusting their kirtles to accommodate heavier outer garments. This process required careful planning and expert knowledge of how different fabrics would behave in changing weather conditions. Winter modifications were particularly complex. The chemise might be made from heavier linen or lightweight wool, providing insulation while maintaining the smooth foundation necessary for proper fit of outer garments. Some women used techniques borrowed from armor making, creating quilted or padded sections in their kirtles that provided warmth without bulk. These modifications had to be invisible under outer garments while providing significant functional benefits. The construction techniques used for these seasonal adaptations reveal the true expertise of medieval seamstresses. They understood how different fabrics would expand and contract with temperature changes, how body heat would affect the drape of different materials, and how to create garments that would maintain their support and shaping properties regardless of weather conditions. This knowledge was acquired through years of observation and experimentation, creating a body of expertise that rivaled any modern technical field. Medieval women's understanding of fabric behavior extended to humidity control as well. They knew which linens would wick moisture away from the skin most effectively, which weaves would provide the best air circulation, and which treatments would prevent fabrics from becoming uncomfortable in high humidity. Some chemises were constructed with strategic ventilation panels that were invisible under outer garments, but provided crucial cooling in warm weather. The regional variations in these techniques tell fascinating stories about medieval life. Women in coastal areas developed different solutions than those in mountainous regions. Mediterranean women faced different challenges than those in northern European climates. Each region developed specialized knowledge about local materials and techniques that were perfectly adapted to their specific environmental conditions. Consider the differences between English and Italian approaches to foundation garments. English women, dealing with damp, cool climate, developed chemises that dried quickly and provided insulation without weight. Italian women, managing intense heat and humidity, created foundation systems that maximized air circulation while maintaining appropriate modesty. Both systems solved the same basic problems but used completely different approaches based on their environmental needs. The economic aspects of medieval women's foundation systems reveal another dimension of their sophistication. These weren't just clothing choices, they were investment strategies. A well-made kirtle might cost more than a common laborer earned in a year, but it would last for decades if properly maintained. Medieval women had to balance immediate needs against long-term value, creating clothing systems that provided maximum utility for their investment. This economic reality drove innovation in construction techniques. Medieval seamstresses developed methods for creating garments that could be altered and updated as fashions changed, as bodies aged, or as circumstances evolved. A young woman's kirtle might be modified for pregnancy, adjusted after childbirth, updated for changing fashion trends, and eventually passed down to a daughter with further modifications. This wasn't just frugality, it was sophisticated resource management that maximized the value of expensive materials and skilled labor. The inheritance of foundation garments created interesting social dynamics. A mother's chemises and kirtles weren't just clothing, they were repositories of knowledge about construction techniques, fabric properties, and fitting methods. When a young woman inherited these garments, she also inherited generations of accumulated expertise about managing her clothing and her appearance. Medieval wills frequently mention specific garments being passed down, not because they were valuable objects, but because they represented knowledge systems that couldn't be easily replaced. A well-fitted kirtle contained information about the wearer's body, her social status, her lifestyle needs, and the technical expertise of the seamstress who created it. This information was too valuable to lose. The apprenticeship systems that trained medieval seamstresses were as rigorous as any modern technical education. Young women spent years learning not just how to sew, but how to understand bodies, fabrics, and the complex social codes that governed medieval dress. They learned to read a woman's lifestyle from her posture, to predict fabric behavior from its feel, and to create garments that would solve problems the wearer might not even realize she had. These seamstresses were part engineer, part artist, and part psychologist. They had to understand not just technical construction, but also the social and emotional needs of their clients. A kirtle wasn't just a garment. It was a tool that enabled a woman to function effectively in her world, and creating that tool required expertise that extended far beyond simple needlework. The fitting process for medieval foundation garments was itself a sophisticated procedure. Unlike modern mass-produced underwear, each kirtle was individually constructed for its wearer. The seamstress had to understand not just the woman's measurements, but her posture, her daily activities, her social requirements, and even her personality. A shy woman needed different construction than a confident one. A woman who spent her days in physical labor required different support than one who primarily engaged in sedentary activities. The final fitting sessions were crucial, as the seamstress made minute adjustments that would determine whether the garment would be comfortable and functional for years to come. These adjustments were based on observations of how the woman moved, breathed, and carried herself while wearing the foundation system. The seamstress was looking for signs of restriction, pressure points, or areas where the garment might shift during normal activities. Medieval women also developed sophisticated maintenance routines for their foundation systems. The chemise required regular washing, but with techniques that would preserve its structure and properties. Different fabrics required different approaches. Some linens needed to be beaten while wet to maintain their softness. Others required specific drying methods to prevent shrinkage or distortion. The kirtle presented different maintenance challenges. It couldn't be washed in the conventional sense, but it required regular care to maintain its shape and support properties. Medieval women developed techniques for refreshing these garments, removing odors and stains, without compromising their structural integrity. Some of these techniques involved herbs and oils that not only cleaned but also provided antimicrobial benefits. Storage of foundation garments was another area where medieval women showed remarkable sophistication. They understood that improper storage could destroy months of work and significant investment. Chemises were folded in specific ways to prevent creasing that might become permanent. Kirtles were stored with supports that maintained their shape, sometimes using specially constructed forms that preserved the three-dimensional structure of the fitted bodice. The seasonal storage routines were particularly elaborate. When transitioning from winter to summer foundation systems, medieval women used specific techniques to prepare garments for long-term storage. This might involve treatments with herbs to prevent insect damage, specific folding methods to prevent fabric stress, and environmental controls to manage humidity and temperature in storage areas. As we begin to understand the full complexity of medieval women's foundation systems, we realize that what appeared to be a simple absence of underwear was actually a sophisticated integration of clothing, engineering, and lifestyle management that puts our modern compartmentalized approach to shame. But the most remarkable aspects of this system are still to be revealed. The most remarkable aspect of medieval women's foundation systems wasn't just their technical sophistication, it was how they transformed the very relationship between a woman and her body. Where modern underwear creates barriers and divisions, medieval foundation systems created integration and harmony. A woman wearing a perfectly fitted chemise and kirtle wasn't just dressed. She was armored for the complex social and physical challenges of her world. This integration extended to the most intimate aspects of medieval women's lives in ways that would astound modern observers. Consider the wedding night of a medieval bride. Where modern women might worry about attractive lingerie or comfortable undergarments, medieval brides faced entirely different considerations. Their foundation systems had to transition seamlessly from the formal requirements of the wedding ceremony to the intimate requirements of married life, all while maintaining the modesty and dignity that medieval society demanded. The chemise played a crucial role in this transition. Made from the finest linen the family could afford, it was both practical and symbolic. The bride's chemise was often decorated with embroidery that told stories, religious symbols for divine blessing, family crests for lineage, and sometimes subtle fertility symbols that modern observers might not even recognize. This wasn't just underwear, it was a garment that carried the hopes and prayers of an entire family. But the practical aspects were equally important. The chemise had to be constructed in ways that allowed for easy removal without damage to the delicate embroidery or expensive fabric. Medieval seamstresses developed techniques for creating openings that were invisible when the garment was worn but accessible when necessary. These construction details required extraordinary skill and showed the deep understanding medieval women had of their bodies and their needs. The psychological aspects of medieval foundation systems become even more apparent when we examine how they handled the transition from maidenhood to motherhood. Modern maternity wear is designed as temporary clothing that accommodates a changing body. Medieval women's foundation systems were designed to evolve with them throughout their entire reproductive lives, creating continuity and stability during periods of profound physical and social change. Pregnancy modifications to the kirtle were particularly ingenious. Rather than creating entirely new garments, medieval seamstresses developed techniques for adjusting existing foundation systems. Strategic seams could be let out, additional panels could be inserted, and lacing systems could be modified to accommodate changing body shapes. These modifications were often invisible, allowing a woman to maintain her appearance and social status throughout her pregnancy. The postpartum period required different solutions entirely. Medieval women understood that their bodies would continue changing for months after childbirth, and their foundation systems had to accommodate this reality. The kirtle's construction allowed for gradual adjustments as the body returned to its pre-pregnancy state, while the chemise provided the comfort and functionality needed for nursing without compromising modesty or appearance. Medieval women also developed sophisticated techniques for managing the physical discomforts that modern women address with specialized undergarments. Where we use sports bras for physical activity, medieval women modified their foundation systems. The kirtle could be laced more tightly for additional support during strenuous activity, while the chemise provided protection against chafing and moisture without restricting movement. For women whose work required physical labor, these adaptations were essential. A baker's wife kneading dough, a merchant's wife loading wagons, or a noble lady riding horses all needed different levels of support and protection. The beauty of the medieval foundation system was its adaptability. The same basic garments could be adjusted to provide whatever level of support was needed for any activity. The seasonal health challenges that medieval women faced also influenced their foundation systems in sophisticated ways. During plague outbreaks, the chemise might be treated with herbs believed to provide protection against disease. The linen's natural antimicrobial properties were enhanced with lavender, rosemary, and other substances that served both practical and psychological purposes. Winter health concerns led to different modifications. The risk of respiratory illness in cold, damp climates meant that foundation systems had to provide warmth without restricting breathing. Medieval women developed techniques for creating insulation that actually supported respiratory health, using natural fibers and construction methods that promoted air circulation while maintaining warmth. The knowledge systems surrounding medieval women's foundation garments were passed down through networks that extended far beyond individual families. Guild systems for seamstresses created standardized techniques that ensured quality and consistency across different regions. Traveling merchants' wives shared innovations between different communities. Noble ladies brought techniques from their birth families to their marriage families, creating cross-pollination of knowledge that drove continuous improvement in construction methods. These knowledge networks also served as quality control systems. A seamstress whose foundation garments failed or caused problems would quickly lose reputation and clients. The competitive pressure to create superior products drove innovation and refinement of techniques. Medieval women demanded perfection from their foundation systems because their social survival often depended on their appearance and their ability to function effectively in their roles. The international aspects of medieval foundation systems reveal another layer of sophistication. Trade routes brought new fabrics, construction techniques, and design ideas from across the known world. A merchant's wife in London might incorporate silk from China, linen from Flanders, and construction techniques learned from Italian seamstresses. This global exchange of knowledge created foundation systems that were truly international in their sophistication. The diplomatic implications were significant as well. When a noble lady married into a foreign court, her foundation systems had to adapt to different climate, different fabrics, and different social expectations while maintaining her dignity and effectiveness. The flexibility and adaptability of medieval foundation systems made this possible in ways that rigid, standardized undergarments could never achieve. Religious considerations also played important roles in medieval foundation systems. Different religious communities had varying requirements for modesty and coverage, and foundation systems had to accommodate these requirements while maintaining functionality. The chemise, in particular, had to provide appropriate coverage for religious observances while remaining practical for daily life. Some religious orders developed specialized foundation systems that reflected their spiritual commitments while addressing practical needs. These systems often influenced secular fashion, as innovations developed in religious communities spread to the broader population through various social networks. The artistic aspects of medieval foundation systems deserve special recognition. The embroidery and decoration on chemises represented some of the finest needlework of the medieval period. These weren't just functional garments, they were canvases for artistic expression that rivaled any other art form of the era. The skills required to create these decorated foundation garments were as demanding as those needed for illuminated manuscripts or cathedral architecture. The symbolic language embedded in this decorative work was as complex as any written communication system. A trained observer could read a woman's chemise like a book, understanding her family history, religious devotion, social aspirations, and personal values from the patterns and motifs incorporated into the embroidery. As medieval society evolved into the early modern period, these sophisticated foundation systems began to give way to the compartmentalized approach we recognize today. The reasons for this change weren't improvements in comfort or functionality. Medieval foundation systems were often superior in these respects. Instead, the changes reflected broader social transformations that valued specialization over integration, mass production over individual craftsmanship, and standardization over adaptability. The transition away from medieval foundation systems represented a loss of knowledge that we're only now beginning to appreciate. Modern fashion designers studying historical construction techniques often discover that medieval seamstresses had solved problems we're still struggling with today. The integration of support, comfort, functionality, and beauty that characterized medieval foundation systems remains an ideal that contemporary fashion has yet to achieve. Understanding medieval women's foundation systems changes our entire perspective on historical women's lives. These weren't oppressed individuals struggling with primitive clothing. They were sophisticated people who had developed elegant solutions to complex challenges. Their foundation systems enabled them to function effectively in demanding social and physical environments while maintaining their dignity, comfort, and health. The absence of underwear as we know it wasn't a lack. It was a different approach that integrated all the functions of undergarments into fewer, more versatile pieces. Medieval women's foundation systems were actually more advanced than our modern approaches in many ways, providing superior comfort, better adaptability, and more elegant solutions to the eternal challenges of clothing the female body. The story of medieval women's foundation systems is ultimately a story about human ingenuity, adaptation, and the remarkable ability of women throughout history to create solutions that work for their specific circumstances. These women faced challenges we can barely imagine, and they met those challenges with creativity, skill, and sophistication that deserves our admiration and respect. When you next see a medieval painting or manuscript illustration showing women in their elaborate gowns, remember what you now know about the sophisticated engineering hidden beneath those flowing fabrics. Remember the chemise that provided comfort, cleanliness, and protection. Remember the kirtle that offered support, shaping, and adaptability. Remember the knowledge systems that created and maintained these remarkable garments. Most importantly, remember that these women weren't enduring their clothing, they were mastering it. They had created a system so sophisticated that it makes our modern compartmentalized approach seem almost primitive by comparison. Where we use separate items for support, shaping, hygiene, and temperature control, they had engineered integrated solutions that accomplished all of these functions simultaneously while providing superior comfort and adaptability. The legacy of medieval women's foundation systems extends far beyond historical curiosity. Modern designers studying these techniques are discovering solutions to problems that plague contemporary fashion. The sustainability movement in fashion is rediscovering the medieval approach of creating fewer, more versatile garments that last longer and serve multiple functions. The natural fibers and construction techniques that medieval women perfected are being studied by modern textile engineers, seeking alternatives to synthetic materials that create environmental problems. Even more significantly, the medieval understanding of how clothing should work with the body rather than against it is inspiring new approaches to garment design. Modern athletic wear increasingly borrows from medieval principles of integrated support and natural movement. High-end fashion designers are studying medieval construction techniques to create garments that provide the same seamless integration of form and function that characterize the medieval foundation system. The psychological insights that medieval women possessed about the relationship between clothing and confidence are being rediscovered by modern researchers. The medieval understanding that foundation garments should enhance natural movement and provide invisible support is now recognized as superior to approaches that restrict or artificially reshape the body. The medieval emphasis on adaptability and personal fit is inspiring custom clothing movements that reject mass-produced standardization in favor of individually crafted solutions. But perhaps the most important lesson from medieval women's foundation systems is about the power of knowledge passed down through generations of women. These sophisticated clothing solutions weren't created by fashion designers or engineers. They were developed by women for women, refined through centuries of daily use, and perfected through the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals who understood their bodies and their needs. This tradition of women's knowledge about clothing and the body was broken when industrialization and mass production replaced individual craftsmanship. We lost not just techniques, but entire ways of thinking about the relationship between clothing and the human form. The medieval approach of creating integrated solutions gave way to the modern approach of creating separate products for separate problems. And in many ways, we've been struggling to regain the elegance and effectiveness of those lost solutions ever since. So the next time you struggle with uncomfortable underwear, poorly fitting bras, or the daily challenge of coordinating multiple undergarments, remember those medieval women who solved these same problems with such sophistication that their solutions worked perfectly for centuries. They achieved something we're still trying to recreate: clothing that truly worked with their bodies, their lives, and their needs without compromise or discomfort. The truth about what medieval women wore beneath their dresses isn't just a fascinating glimpse into the past. It's a reminder that sometimes the most advanced solutions are the ones that integrate multiple functions into elegant, adaptable systems, rather than breaking problems down into separate, specialized products. These women weren't lacking underwear. They had transcended the need for it by creating something far more sophisticated. Their legacy challenges us to think differently about our own relationship with clothing and our bodies, to consider whether our modern solutions are truly improvements, or whether we might have something to learn from the ingenious women who created foundation systems so perfect that they enabled centuries of comfort, confidence, and capability without a single item we would recognize as underwear. And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable revelation of all, that what seemed like an absence was actually the presence of something far more advanced than anything we've managed to create since.